Katrina's massive destruction in the black population belt through New Orleans and along the Gulf Coast threw more than 250,000 Americans out of work. A potential compensation, however, was that the cleanup and rebuilding would provide jobs for a significant number of them. The early work, especially, would be backbreaking and dirty, and because of that, the jobs would surely pay well. African American men, many of whom had not had jobs even before the storm, enthusiastically attempted to get into the hiring lines all along the coast. But they never stood much of a chance in competition with the labor contractors who swooped in with their unending caravans of buses filled with immigrants and other foreign-born workers. A particularly painful example involved a local employment service in Mobile, Alabama. Contractors that had been hired by the government to clear and rebuild that area of the coast sent out an urgent request for workers. The labor company had no trouble lining up U.S. citizens, mostly African Americans, to take the first 270 jobs that were said to be opening up. But after the first workers had spent only 2 weeks on the job, the contractors laid them off and sent them home, telling them that the Mexicans had arrived and would accept lower wages. Linda Swope, the operator of the local labor agency, described the reaction when she had to tell the workers who were waiting to start their jobs.
When we told the guys they would not be needed, they actually cried. And we cried with them. This is a shame. I assure you it is not true that Americans don't want to work.
She said most of the men had lost their regular jobs because of the hurricane.
The men we sent to jobs in Alabama were local fellows looking for work, men who needed jobs. After driving 50 miles to the work sites where they had been promised $10 an hour, they discovered the employers had found substitutes who were willing to work for less.
African Americans in New Orleans who stayed through the hurricane and those who returned to find jobs in the aftermath were left to sit on their porches and watch their city be rebuilt by the armies of workers that federal policies had provided through continuous annual immigration surges and weak immigration enforcement. Adding insults to injury, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security gave the green light to all contractors hiring illegal workers instead of African Americans and other U.S. citizens. The presence of a lot of foreign-born workers in an occupation or at a particular job location is often assumed to mean that they are there because American workers weren't interested in doing that kind of work. But, as in the case of the post-Katrina jobs calamity, it often means that Americans, particularly African Americans, have been intentionally excluded or at least never assertively recruited.